We've reached dark times in the gaming industry, as each platform is flooded by uninspired sequels, countless remasters, and scummy monetization practices designed to squeeze you dry. Gamers have become more negative than ever. And why shouldn't we be? We're lucky to get a handful of AAA releases per year worth our time, and even less worth $60. And yet, these lazy rehashes still sell millions each year. Maybe some of you don't know that there are alternatives. Maybe some of you are too lazy to find out. Maybe some of you just aren't willing to play old games. Well, I'm here to tell you that those old games are far better than most of today's offerings. If you can get past the dated graphics, older titles offer the solution to your lost interest in video games.
Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4. Everyone's heard of it. In fact, some of you have probably already played it. This video is for those of you who never finished it, never gave it a chance because it was too dated, or say that your backlog is large enough already. I'm here to tell you why it's not only worth your time and money, but that it's also one of the greatest games ever made. Before the franchise's fourth entry, Resident Evil focused on limited combat scenarios with little gunplay skills involved, the majority of the difficulty being the stiff tank controls, fixed camera angles, and limited ammo. The game did most of the aiming for you. RE4 radically changes this by becoming an action game with horror elements instead of the other way around. Enemies are numerous and drop ammo and money when killed, encouraging you to kill them instead of avoid them like the previous entries. And the gunplay involved is the backbone that holds everything together. It's the reason I continue to replay it even 15 years later. Accuracy is everything in this game. It might seem like a gimmick today, but back in 2005, enemies reacting based on where you shot them was revolutionary. It's not just visually satisfying either, but a core part of the gameplay mechanics. If you shoot a ganado, the human enemies, in the head or the knees, you can perform a special melee attack that knocks them down and pushes back any surrounding enemies. And the best part? You're invincible during the entire animation. This creates a risk-reward scenario where you can attempt to save as much ammo as possible by quickly headshotting an enemy in a group, and then run up and mash the action button to melee every enemy at once. If you knock them all down, or just feel particularly ballsy, you can knife them on the ground and effectively take them all out with a single bullet. It's decisions like this that keep the game interesting even after you played it before. The other major aspect of the gunplay is the weapon diversity. Each weapon type fills a specific role. The handgun triggers follow-up attacks, the shotgun knocks down multiple enemies per shot, the rifle can one-shot grunts from extreme ranges, and the machine pistol and magnum deal high DPS. This might sound like standard fare to experienced FPS players, but combined with the other mechanics, it creates an interesting dynamic. It incentivizes you to constantly switch weapons to optimize saving as much valuable ammo as possible, while avoiding taking damage yourself. There are multiple weapons of each type, so if you prefer higher damage per shot, rate of fire, or magazine size, you have multiple options. Though in the case of the rifles, the semi-automatic is pretty much better in every way. Also, it's worth noting that the guns just feel fun to shoot. Whether knocking down 3 ganados at once with a shotgun blast or exploding heads from 100 yards, the sound effects are meaty and the recoil makes them feel powerful. One of the criticisms I hear of RE4 is that the movement feels too stiff for an action game. Why would they stick to tank controls? Look, I get it. In an era of movement-based shooters, RE4 can feel pretty slow. But that's exactly one of its greatest strengths. Since you can't just dodge projectiles, you have to rely on your aim and quick wits to avoid death. The game is designed around this. The first time that you shoot a hatchet out of the air, you'll feel like Gun Jesus, even if it's completely by accident. And if you think that's good, just wait until you shoot dynamite. This might seem like I'm sucking the game's dick, but honestly I love the inventory system. To this day I wish another game would copy it, just because it's satisfying to rearrange everything. It's an anal retentive player's wet dream. Using the actual gun models in the attaché case adds a layer of immersion to it as well. Things like this probably mean nothing to the majority of people, but to me it helps give the game its identity. I often find enemy variety to be an overlooked aspect of video games. Even in games that have it in spades, like the Souls games, people rarely mention it. The few times it is talked about is when a game lacks it completely. Either you fight an endless sea of reskins, or the combat is so trivial that the enemies are irrelevant. RE4 stands somewhere in the middle of the scale. Most combat scenarios involve a few basic enemy types, the Ganados having around a dozen different models spread around these types. 15 years ago it wasn't as noticeable, but today it feels like you're killing the same 10 Spaniards 1,000 times. So you would think this would make every fight feel the same, right? That couldn't be further from the truth. The developers keep things fresh mainly in two ways. The first is by throwing in some mini-bosses or segments with entirely new enemies like the Novistadors.
Great! More of them!
And the Regeneradors. Not to mention a selection of damn good boss fights. The boss fights at face value aren't particularly unique. They all generally have large health pools, can be damaged by any weapon, and have an attack that can be avoided or escaped with a quick time event. The exception being Del Lago, which is a gimmick boss. He's the first boss and has a decent gimmick, so he gets a pass from me. The rest of these battles devolve into unloading a metric ton of TMP ammo, or a handful of Magnum rounds, into the freaks while mashing the QTE buttons or running away when the boss gets close. Despite this, there's still a lot of fun because they have a handful of attacks to choose from and can kill you pretty quickly. This gives you just enough leeway to make a few mistakes to learn the boss's moveset while still remaining a threat. The second way the game never gets boring is the level design, but first, a little rant. Let's talk about QuickTime events. Back in the PS2 era, God of War, Kingdom Hearts 2, and RE4 were the only games pushing for QTEs to be a part of the core gameplay mechanics, and for good reason. For me personally, QuickTime events will never be as interesting or entertaining as actually playing the game or watching a cutscene. It's the worst of both worlds. You don't get the satisfaction of performing an action through skill, and you don't get to relax and watch a hopefully movie production level of quality scene play out. God of War handled them about as well as you possibly could. You always knew when they were coming because you had to initiate them yourself. Brutally goring the opponents afterward felt pretty good too. Kingdom Hearts 2 also did a good job by tying them to one button and leaving them outside of cutscenes. RE4 on the other hand did a goddamn terrible job with QTEs. Outside of follow-up attacks and escaping grapples, these are easily the least forgiving QTEs I've ever seen. You basically get half a second to react, and if you fail, you're dead. No second chances. Also, in cutscenes, the inputs are randomly selected between a combination of two buttons. Even worse, on PC, one of the inputs is X and C. Do I even need to explain why that's shitty? I figured about 2/3 of the way through the game that E can substitute, but do you think the game ever explains this? In one specific incredibly frustrating instance, for absolutely no reason at all, E doesn't work. And wouldn't you guess it's during the Krauser boss fight. What is normally on console a trivial fight if you know what you're doing is much more difficult on PC because you have to remove your left hand off of the movement keys to stand any chance of inputting XC in time to avoid any of his attacks. Now you could just switch to a controller, but that's pussy shit. I won't spoil the trick to this fight for first time players, but just know that there's an easier way to deal with him than spray and pray. You know what? Fuck that. I'm gonna tell you exactly how to beat him. Just trap him in the corner and knife him in the face, over and over again. That's exactly what you need to do. Repeat until catharsis.
That's a large thing you have there. But I don't like it when men play rough.
RE4 features some of the most varied set pieces I've ever seen in a game. And these aren't your typical modern AAA cinematic set pieces where the game holds your hand the whole way through. No, in RE4 you interact with every situation with the same tools you've had since the start, minus a few simple puzzles. I can't possibly do justice to the vast amount of effort that went into creating these moments without spoiling the whole game, so instead I'll just talk about a few. About 3/4 of the way through the village segment, Leon and Ashley flee from an army of Ganados, finding refuge in a solitary home. Inside they find Louise Sarah, whom Leon saved from certain death earlier. After a cheeky comment about Ashley's assets,
I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics too.
How rude!
it's up to the two of them to defend the house from a seemingly endless wave of enemies. What's unique about this segment is that it's the only time you ever have an ally fight with you, and he's surprisingly helpful. Not only does he have unlimited ammo and can't die, but he gives you some of his endless supply and actually pulls his weight killing the enemies. Too bad Capcom quickly forgot how to make AI partners in the next game. But even with the best help you could hope for, it's still a challenging sequence. The first part of the siege involves holding out on the bottom floor while Ganados slowly break through your defenses. As they smash the bookshelves one by one, they flood into the cramped ground floor. In spite of their combined efforts, Leon and Luis can't hold them off. Plagas parasites are splitting from their severed heads, slicing you to ribbons. As you retreat to the second floor, villagers set up ladders and start climbing through the windows. You frantically try to push the ladders down, but you're getting overwhelmed. When all hope seems lost, the Ganados suddenly retreat and you breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, I'm being a bit dramatic, but that's how I felt the first time I played this section. By this point in the game, you can start getting a bit overconfident as you've beaten a couple bosses, acquired some decent weapons, and probably gotten a hold of the mechanics. Well, the house defense will show that you're not nearly as good as you think you are. I still have trouble avoiding death in this part, and I've probably beaten this game 8 times. It's basically the first village section without any option to run away. It's not the hardest part of the game, but it's definitely one of the most memorable. So, you're fighting your way through a castle, right? You've dealt with some weird shit already. Invisible bugs in the sewer, fire-breathing dragon statues surrounded by lava, autonomous suits of armor controlled by parasites. But a minecart ride? Really? Apparently in the catacombs of the castle, the Ganados built an elaborate roller coaster ride through a mine, and it's exactly as exciting as you would expect. Trapped in 3 small carts with no maneuverability, your shotgun is your best friend as villagers jump into the carts from platforms, including a couple of chainsaw men. With nowhere to run, you better have saved a stockpile of ammo or you might lose your head. Of course, for some reason the end of the track is unfinished, so Leon must summon his inner Nathan Drake and leap to a convenient nearby ledge. Let's hope you're good at mashing buttons, otherwise you have to restart the whole segment. Despite the unforgiving ending, I still have a great time with this part. It's just short enough that restarting feels more like a test of your own patience than a deliberate punishment by the devs. Though a checkpoint wouldn't hurt. The level itself feels pretty random and nonsensical, but you're used to that by this point in the game. Realism is overrated anyway. I could go on about all the little moments I love, but I would rather leave some of that as a surprise for the few of you who haven't already been spoiled. Instead, I'm going to tackle perhaps the most common criticism of the game, Ashley. Early on, you find the president's daughter in a nearby church. She can't fight, or shoot, or really do anything remotely useful. There's only one command to control her: to wait in one spot or to follow. She can be killed in 2 hits, and if a ganado carries her to a nearby door between areas, you immediately game over. Now, I realize this sounds bad, and honestly it is, but it's very manageable as long as you know what you're doing. At the beginning of some of the village areas, there are open dumpsters that you can send Ashley into, where she's completely invincible, and the ganados aren't smart enough to find her even if they see her go into it. This pretty much eliminates the difficulty escorting her in the first third of the game. The castle is a bit more difficult, but Ashley gets kidnapped twice, so she's not even following you through most of it. The same goes for the island. Realistically, she's only in real danger for about 1 to 2 hours out of this 12 to 15 hour game. People always bring up Ashley as some kind of huge blemish on an otherwise amazing game, when really I hardly notice her outside of a handful of segments. My only advice is, always keep her behind you and don't leave her too far behind if you make her wait. That's all you need to do.
What are you buying? Is that all strength?
Generally, when I think of progression as a major gameplay component, I think of RPGs. Progression exists in almost every video game in the strictest sense, whether it's moving through the story or just beating a level. My personal definition is purely gameplay focused. The progression is through the player character and their environment, which is why RPGs have it in spades. Leveling up, stats on equipment, status effects and immunities, raising damage numbers, and gaining abilities are all built into the core of the genre. Over the past few console generations, developers have figured out that every genre could use these mechanics, for better or worse. RE4 keeps RPG elements minimal but satisfying by having a tangible effect on gameplay. At the start of the game, all you have is a handgun and your trusty knife. Through the iconic Shady Merchant, you can buy all kinds of weapons and upgrade the damage, fire rate, reload speed, and magazine size. These simple upgrades might not look like much, but they make a massive difference over time. The Broken Butterfly goes from 13 to 28 damage per shot. For reference, the first handgun does 1 damage per shot. He also sells larger attaché cases and weapon attachments, pretty much everything you need except ammo, which makes absolutely no sense logically, especially considering the enemies drop ammo despite not using guns, but like everything else, it's an intentional design choice. You find money on enemies and in barrels, but a large part of your income will come from treasures hidden in the environment. It adds an exploration element to the game that I really appreciate. Some of the treasures are actually pretty well hidden, making the treasure maps the merchant sells worth it in the long run. To tie back into the skill ceiling aspect of the game, the more ammo you have, the more likely enemies will drop money instead of ammo. So if you played the game before or are just great at shooters in general, you can buy every upgrade you want as they become available. It's a really simple system, just collect money and buy upgrades. To quote a marketing legend,
all of this just works.
You are a long way from home, cowboy. You have my sympathies.
Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice. Anyway, you know what this is all about. My assignment is to search for the president's missing daughter.
What? All by yourself?
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire. Then again, maybe you did.
So, the president's daughter has been kidnapped by Los Illuminados, a mysterious cult, and taken to, not Spain. It's up to Leon S. Kennedy, one of the few survivors of the zombie outbreak in Raccoon City, to rescue her and stop the cult from infecting the world with Las Plagas, a parasite that can mutate and control people. And that's about it. There are a few plot developments, some twists and turns, but the whole game is spent rescuing Ashley and thwarting the cult's plans of world domination. The story is not meant to be taken seriously, and the dialogue reflects this. Nearly every line out of Leon's mouth is a one-liner fit for an 80s action movie.
Where's everyone going? Bingo? Hasta luego. Monsters. Guess after this, there'll be one less to worry about. Sadler, why don't you give up and let Ashley go home?
Perhaps you are disillusioned with overconfidence, just because you killed my small-time subordinate.
Sadler, you're small time.
If you like campy movies, you'll love the cutscenes in this game. While there's a bit of fan service for longtime fans of the series, you don't have to play any previous entries to understand the plot, so just sit back and have a good time. But don't get too relaxed in case a quick time event pops up. Let's be clear. I'm well aware that this game is not pleasing to look at by today's standards. The HD remaster exposes how muddy and simple the textures are, and some of the objects in the environment are really low poly. But aesthetically, the game is still appealing in my eyes, partially because I enjoy an atmosphere of horror, but also because of the sheer variety of assets created to make every area look unique. The developers made the most of village, castle, and island laboratory environments, and then some. To avoid repeating myself and spoiling even more of the game, I'll leave it at that. The soundtrack is also worth a mention for attempting to maintain the facade that Resident Evil was still focused on horror. A surprising number of tracks are unique, ambient, creepy songs that only play in a couple of segments. My favorite one is Infiltration, which gives off a nice blend of spooky and actiony vibes that feel perfect for exploring a huge labyrinthine castle. It's the only song in the soundtrack that I listen to outside of the game. The Mercenaries bonus mode actually has some really catchy tunes as well. The rest of the soundtrack is more generic action game orchestrated stuff. Not particularly memorable, but not bad by any means. Hard to say much else because musical taste is highly subjective. Unlike modern AAA games, RE4 and many other games from its era had these features called unlockables, a long dead concept from a time before DLC. Basically, you play a game and get rewarded for completing certain conditions with free new content. Imagine that. RE4 actually has quite a few extra things unlocked after you beat it. The first of which is professional difficulty. Essentially just a fancy name for hard mode with a little twist. Big fans of the game will notice I never mentioned adaptive difficulty, one of RE4's more interesting gameplay mechanics. As the name implies, the game will get easier or harder depending on how well you play. If you have high accuracy, avoid damage, and have plenty of ammo, the game will spawn more enemies, give them more health, and make them more aggressive, and also reduce ammo drops. Eventually, the difficulty scale will max out, and you'll temporarily be bumped up to professional difficulty. To lower it back down, just take damage, miss some shots, or, for instant results, die. The reason it works so well is because it's just subtle enough that you wouldn't ever notice it unless you played the game multiple times. What professional difficulty does is keep the scale maxed out, which can really screw you over in the later parts of the games when you start running out of ammo and can't get anything to drop other than handgun rounds. There are also a few sections with bullshit enemy placement that normally you or Ashley would get killed and then the problem enemies would despawn on a retry. In Professional, this never happens, so you have to either get good or reload a save where you have more health or ammo. One last fuck you in Professional is the removal of the assault vest, a late game item which reduces damage by 30%. It's a good challenge and worth the extra playthrough if you're in the mood to play the game again. The first bonus mode you should play is Separate Ways, a mini campaign following Ada Wong's exploits during the events of the game. 3 of the levels are retreads of the main story with different combat encounters, but the 4th is a completely new area with a battle against a warship, and the 5th has a completely new boss battle that is easily the hardest and most bullshit fight in the whole game. Whether that's a good or bad thing is up to you. It's fairly short at around 3 hours, so the developers decided to cut the weapon upgrade mechanic entirely, and you just use money to buy new weapons. Sadly, this makes the shotgun obsolete by the 4th level, but the campaign is so short that it's irrelevant. I'm basically just nitpicking. From a story perspective, the mode doesn't add much, but you do get a few new cutscenes that are sadly ruined because the remaster team was too lazy to upscale them. Overall, still a fun mode, and beating it unlocks the Chicago typewriter for New Game Plus. Yes, this game even has New Game Plus. An infinite ammo Tommy gun that hits like a truck. You can also unlock alternate costumes for Leon and Ashley. The latter is actually being incredibly useful because it makes her invincible and Ganados can't carry her. They even added an animation where Leon holds his back in pain after catching her. It's these little attentions to detail that impress me to this day. The second bonus mode is Assignment Ada. I actually don't have much to say about this one because it's pretty basic. You play as Ada in the island section of the game and you try to find 5 Plaga samples in fixed locations while killing a lot of Ganados. That's about it. You end up running through about half the island in about 30 minutes, with the only challenge being the ammo is slightly more restrictive. All that you unlock is the Chicago typewriter for Separate Ways, which you probably won't ever replay, so it's pointless. Not a terrible mode, but completely skippable. The last bonus mode is Mercenaries, which actually originated in Resident Evil 3, but in a different format. In RE4, you have 5 different characters playable in 4 different stages, where the objective is to kill as many enemies as possible in a limited time frame. If you kill multiple enemies in a row, you build a combo. The bigger the combo, the more bonus points. On each map, there are time extensions and 30-second bonus score pickups to further increase your chance at a high ranking. At first, you can only play as Leon, who has the basic handgun shotgun. But each time you get a 4-star rank on a stage, you unlock a new character with different guns, and in Krauser's case, a special ability. Leon is pretty boring in this mode, but each character after him has a unique setup that spices things up. Ada has the semi-auto sniper so you can headshot people for days. Krauser only has a bow with normal arrows, but he can use his giant arm blade to instantly kill anyone in front of him. Hunk of 4th Survivor fame has a special TMP that's really powerful, and his follow-up on a headshot has him snap the neck of the enemy, another instant kill. Wesker has a silenced handgun with a high headshot percentage to kill weaker enemies and a magnum for the stronger ones. Krauser is probably the most fun and easy to use, but not always the best for getting points. Not that the points matter that much, because the only unlock for outside of the mode is the hand cannon, an extremely powerful magnum. Which sounds cool, but you have to get 5 stars on all 4 stages with all 5 characters. Not even slightly worth the effort unless you love the mode. Personally, I think Mercenaries only got better as the series went on, with Raid mode from Revelations 2 being the best version of it to date. RE4's version is still fun, but it's missing any kind of progression that would keep me coming back. It's fun for about an hour or 2, and that's it.
Better try a new trick, cause that one's getting old.
That's it, folks. Even after 15 years, RE4 remains one of the most polished and well-designed games of all time. In my opinion, it's still the greatest third-person shooter ever made. It's rare that you find a game where all the mechanics and the levels blend together so well that you never feel bored. I've beaten the game 8 times now, and I'll probably play it again in a couple years. It's just that good. So who would I recommend this game to? Everyone. Honestly, just try it. The only people who dislike this game that I'm aware of are fanboys too attached to what Resident Evil used to be, and people obsessed with graphical fidelity. So where can you buy this game? Basically on every platform. Since its initial release on GameCube, it has been ported to PS2, Wii, PS3, Xbox 360, PC, PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. Its standard MSRP is $20, but you can get it for much cheaper on digital storefronts when it's on sale. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that you have no excuse not to play it. The sad thing is that despite being on every console in the last 15 years, the game has only sold 7.5 million copies. I know that sounds like a lot, but for comparison that's less than every individual Call of Duty game since 4. Gamers will complain every year that games released today are uninspired, boring, rip-offs, exploitative, and so on, but I guarantee you most of them haven't even attempted to play old games. Well, it's never too late to start. Older titles aren't going anywhere. Any gaming enthusiast owes it to themselves to explore the medium. Venture outside of your comfort zone. Play some new genres. Try some cult classics. Experience the greatest games of all time. That's why you should play Resident Evil 4. To all 5 of you that made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. This is the part where I ramble on about myself and RE4, so feel free to stop the video here if that isn't your thing. This is my first YouTube video in probably 10 years, but I've been watching YouTube for nearly as long as I've been on the internet. I've read countless YouTube comments and written more than a few of my own, so I can handle honest criticism on this video. I can already foresee some of the comments. I'm sure some people will talk about my monotone voice, and yes, I really sound like this. I'll try to come across as more enthusiastic in future videos, but no promises, I guess. I've always sounded like this, unfortunately. So, I guess I can talk about some of the things I cut out of my review. There's the striker speed glitch, which I didn't really want to talk about because although it's pretty damn fun, it kind of breaks the game in certain ways. I mean, it's more of a speed running tactic than anything, but it's pretty fun and easy to use. You can look it up if you want to do it yourself. I've got a bit of footage messing around with it here. There's also the exclusive weapon upgrades I didn't mention. Not too much to say there. Pretty much it just, after you fully upgrade your weapon, you get an expensive upgrade, which significantly boosts one of the stats, usually damage. In the case of the striker, it gives it 100 capacity, which is like, you know, the fucking no drum magazine can hold 100 rounds, or 100 shells. But Jesus, like, it's so amazing. I mean, it's essentially enough ammo for the rest of the game at that point. Like, the striker is just a god tier gun. I love it. It's easily one of the best shotguns in a video game. It's awesome. I could have talked about more of the infinite ammo weapons. The problem is like, most of them aren't very fun, actually, to use. The Chicago typewriter is probably the most fun one, and even that one, like, it's basically just god mode. The hand cannon also, I mean, you know, the amount of work that goes into getting it kind of neutralizes any of the payoff, in a sense, because it's just not really worth it. It's just not really worth it unless you really like Mercenaries. Then there's like the infinite rocket launcher, which is pretty sweet. Just gotta beat the game to unlock the ability to buy that one. And then for beating professional, which I guess I could have mentioned, but I really hate the gun, it shouldn't exist, is the PRL 412. It's like a UV ray gun. It basically, you just charge it up and it shoots light rays and instantly kills everything on screen. I mean, it's kind of cool to shoot like once or twice, but then you kind of wish it didn't exist after that. I wish it didn't exist. I guess I could have talked about the history of development. It's pretty interesting because I think most people know the story by now. You'd be better off watching like Did You Know Gaming or something, because it's honestly worth hearing, but it didn't really have a place in the review because honestly the whole point of these reviews is just to convince somebody to play a game. You don't really need to know the history of a game like that. How is that going to convince you really to play it, you know? I mean, it's interesting for bad games, right? Because like Resident Evil 4, its backstory is essentially similar to like Duke Nukem Forever or something. Where, I mean, they restarted development, what, 3 or 4 times, something like that. And, you know, one of them went on to become Devil May Cry, which I guess is the more interesting part of the story. But for a game that had to restart development so many times, that just makes it all the more impressive that it turned out so well, you know. But still, you know, it just doesn't have place in a review like this. Actually, I did leave out one more thing from the review. The Mine Thrower, which is oddly appropriate because I didn't do it on purpose. I literally just forgot it existed because I never use it. And it's not a bad weapon, actually. I loaded the game back up and played around with it a bit. The problem with it is that it doesn't fill any unique role because it's basically a grenade launcher combined with a sniper. It doesn't do enough damage to replace the sniper or like just using grenades. Like, you could definitely use the weapon. It's not a bad weapon by any means, but there's no reason to buy it, really. Like, it's not really worth the inventory space. I'm sure there's some people who swear by it, but I can't think of a reason to use it over any other weapon. Also, probably for future videos, at least for the next like 4 months, probably at least, I'm not gonna cover like greatest of all time type games. You know, there's only so many of those. You know, you want to save those for more special occasions. I mean, I realize those will probably get more views, at least if I ever get any kind of popularity. I would rather try to cover a lot of games that people actually either haven't heard of or just overlooked because they weren't talked about that much, you know, that are worth playing. Not really hidden gems. Honestly, like most hidden gem videos that I've seen, the games usually aren't actually worth playing, or you know, they just have some kind of fatal flaw that is the reason people have never heard of them, you know. It's a popular topic of debate, like what even is a hidden gem. You know, people will say like it's more like a cult classic if it's sold, you know, above a certain amount of units, you know. But like the best hidden gem I could think of that I would make a video on would probably be like Xenogears, honestly. Xenogears is a pretty great game. Except for Disc 2, which just, it goes to shit. Just absolutely goes to shit. Because there was just they didn't have time to finish the game, you know. It's one of those stories, you know. It wasn't even budgetary constraints, it was just straight up, they couldn't delay the game back then. So they had to release an unfinished product. I don't know, that's probably about as good a place to end this. I doubt anyone stuck around this long anyway, but play Resident Evil 4. There you go. That's the moral of the video, if it needs a moral.